I'll never forget the dry sound of that slap. It was as if time had stopped the instant her hand met my face. The crack echoed through the entire room, muffling even the noise from the television that was still murmuring in the background. For a second I thought no one had seen it. But everyone's eyes were on me, or rather on the mark forming on my dark skin, a burning red that stung more from humiliation than physical pain. My daughter-in-law, with her chin raised and eyes sparkling with arrogance, showed no remorse. On the contrary, she took advantage of the family's silence to deliver the sentence she seemed to have already rehearsed. Hand over the keys to this house right now. It's high time you stopped clinging to what's no longer yours. The world spun slowly. My fingers still trembled, trying to hold the glass of water that almost fell from my hand. The silence was heavy, cutting. My son, sitting on the couch, didn't move. There was no gesture of defense, no word of reproach. He just lowered his eyes, as if he didn't want to see the cowardice being born inside him. The room was lit by the late afternoon, a golden light that entered through the curtains and contrasted with the darkness I felt inside my chest. Every detail was etched like a photograph. The distant sound of children playing in the street, the smell of coffee that still lingered from our snack, the curious look of the neighbor who passed slowly by the open window. Everything continued as if nothing had happened, but inside me something had broken. What hurt most wasn't the aggression itself. It was the contempt, the look that pierced through me as if I were an object out of place. For years I had endured veiled comments, that my clothes were too old-fashioned, that my hair needed better care, that the house was too big for a lady alone. I never responded. I always thought silence was the best answer to small cruelties. But that day, I realized my silence had been interpreted as weakness. As my daughter-in-law extended her hand demanding the keys, a chill ran down my spine. The sensation wasn't just pain or indignation. It was as if I finally saw the hidden plot behind each of her gestures, each false smile, each poisonous word she made me swallow in silence. And as much as the mark on my face hurt, there was something even stronger burning inside me. The certainty that this scene would be only the first act of a story she would never forget. In that instant, I realized my life would never be the same. My name is Alzira, I'm 63 years old, and every brick of this house carries the weight of my endless nursing shifts. I worked entire nights, cleaning wounds no one wanted to touch, caring for patients who called me black woman, with mouths full of pain and contempt. And still I remained firm. That's how I managed to save enough to buy this land, raise these walls, and give my son a decent roof. I raised him alone. His father abandoned us when my boy was still crawling, and I never heard from that man again. I was mother, father, provider, comfort, and shield. On good days, I made sure to smile so my son would believe the world was less cruel than it really was. On bad days, I cried alone, lying on my pillow, so he wouldn't carry my burdens. And even with all this effort, I notice how I'm treated by those who should honor me. My daughter-in-law never needed to openly say what she thought of me. The looks were enough. The way she wrinkled her nose when she saw my calloused hands serving the table. Or when she said, between laughs, that I should already be grateful for not having to live in a back house like many out there. I always smiled to disguise it, but each word was a cut. The worst part wasn't what she said, but what she managed to extract from my son. Silence. He didn't defend me. Maybe out of cowardice, maybe out of misdirected love, maybe out of shame of me. His silence was like a hammer pounding, reminding me that I was alone even within the family I created. But anyone who thinks I didn't notice is wrong. I always noticed the way they erased me, as if I were a shadow that only served while useful. And even so, I pretended not to see. Pretending was my protection. Pretending was my strategy. They thought I was fragile, that my back bent by time meant surrender. Little did they know that the force that builds also knows how to destroy if necessary. While wiping away silent tears after the slap, a voice inside me whispered, "You won't be invisible anymore." I didn't know yet how, but I knew that story wouldn't end with my keys in her hand. If you've ever lived the pain of being diminished within your own family, you know how suffocating it feels to be erased. That's why I tell my story, so you walk with me to the end. Subscribe because this is just the beginning. And I still couldn't imagine how far they would be capable of going. After the slap and humiliation, I thought the storm had passed. But no, that was just the warning. Their true intention began to reveal itself in small gestures. Small conversations left hanging in the air like someone throwing crumbs for someone to follow. One night, my son appeared at home with a restless look. The daughter-in-law beside him smiled as always, that porcelain smile that never reached her eyes. They sat at the table and, between forkfuls of rice and beans, began talking about security. "Mom, have you ever thought about what could happen if you stay alone in such a big house?" he said, avoiding looking at me. "It's dangerous." A black woman at this age in a house this size, she completed, feigning concern. The tone was too sweet, almost theatrical. Each word carried hidden poison. They pretended to worry, but I knew. This wasn't about me, it was about the house. While moving my fork around the plate, I observed how my daughter-in-law leaned slightly forward, like someone conducting an invisible orchestra. My son followed her notes, repeating ready-made phrases, as if they weren't his. "Maybe it would be better to transfer the deed to our name, just to make things easier," he murmured without courage to raise his eyes. My heart tightened, but my face remained serene. I swallowed the lump in my throat and faced every detail. The white tablecloth, the metallic sound of the cutlery, the smell of food that suddenly lost its flavor. They talked as if I were a burden, as if my years of struggle and sacrifice could be erased with a pen and a signature. The daughter-in-law, satisfied with the silence that hung over me, gave a slight corner smile, like someone already savoring victory. But she didn't notice the different gleam in my eyes. Because while they thought they were bending me, they were actually just showing me the size of the ambition that guided them. That night, I realized their plan wasn't just to take my keys. They wanted to tear from me the only piece of world I built with my own hands. They wanted to erase my history from the walls I raised alone. And realizing this, something inside me lit up. It wasn't uncontrolled rage. It was something colder, sharper. The silent promise that I wouldn't let this go cheap. It was then that an unexpected discovery changed the course of everything. Days after that bitter dinner, the house was full of voices, forced laughter, and footsteps that echoed through the corridors as if the space no longer belonged to me. My daughter-in-law had invited a friend to spend the afternoon, and, as always, they occupied the guest room without asking. I, in silence, just observed, invisible inside what I built. When the visitor left, I went to tidy the room. It was almost a ritual of mine, straightening the bed, collecting forgotten glasses, returning things that weren't mine to their place. But that afternoon, fate delivered more to me than a dirty cup or a misplaced pillow. When I bent down to pick up a coat that had fallen beside the bed, I noticed a half-open folder inside my daughter-in-law's forgotten purse. My heart raced. Something in me said not to touch, but my hands moved on their own. I pulled out the papers slowly, with the care of someone who knows they're handling poison. And what I found chilled me to the bone. They were printed copies of messages, conversations between her and my own son, discussing deadlines and strategies. Phrases like, "We need to convince her quickly," and "The realtor is already on standby," burned my eyes. Along with them, a draft sales contract, already with a prepared digital signature, where my house was listed as property available for immediate transaction. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. It wasn't just suspicion. It wasn't an old mother's paranoia. They really planned to tear me from my home, reduce me to nothing. The letters, still fresh, had the metallic smell of ink, as if the paper exhaled betrayal. I closed the folder carefully and put it back in place, but not before memorizing every detail. Dates, names, the real estate company's logo. Those papers were a blatant confession. For a few seconds, my legs almost couldn't support the weight of the discovery. I leaned on the headboard and closed my eyes. I saw, like in a movie, each night shift, each hidden tear, each coin saved to raise those walls. Everything I had conquered, now threatened by people I myself had welcomed. But along with the pain came a strange calm. A calm that only those who have suffered a lot know. Cold, silent, cutting like a razor. I took my notebook, the same one I always used to record recipes and bills, and wrote down every detail I saw. I wouldn't let anything slip by. In that instant, I knew I was no longer a cornered woman. I had proof. And proof can become weapons. I kept that secret with the same zeal of someone hiding a sharp blade in their pocket. They had no idea that the quiet old woman was gradually preparing the ground to turn the game around. I kept each piece of evidence like someone sharpening a silent blade, waiting for the right moment to use it. After discovering those hidden papers, I realized that the best weapon I could wield at that moment was silence. Not the resigned silence of someone who accepts defeat, but the calculated silence of someone who observes and collects ammunition. I began noting every detail. Times when they went out, conversations murmured in the hallway, glances exchanged during meals. And little by little, the pieces began to fit together. My daughter-in-law, always in a hurry, let phrases slip like, "when it's our turn," or, "I already talked to the lawyer." My son, on the other hand, withdrew, avoiding my eyes, like someone who knows they're too ashamed to sustain their own lie. The daily microaggressions, which I used to swallow like swallowing bile, now became fuel. When she laughed at my natural hair, saying it looked unkempt, I smiled inside. Each comment was another stone in the wall I was building against her. When she complained about my simple clothes, insinuating that I looked like a maid in my own house, I remembered every cent I saved sewing dresses for neighbors. And when, at a Sunday lunch, she commented in front of everyone that people of color should be more grateful for achieving something like this, I just took a deep breath and continued serving the table. But inside me, I recorded every word like a confession. It was curious to see how they confused my calm with weakness. They thought I was surrendered, when in fact I was just sharpening, in silence, the blade of my moral revenge. I already had proof, but I still needed something more. The right moment, the ideal stage, the perfect audience. And while they sank into their own arrogance, I grew stronger. They thought they were in control, but each day, each insult, each careless act, the one really conducting the story was me. If you've ever been through situations where you were diminished with subtle words or attitudes, you know the pain that causes. Like in Leave Your Comment, your experience might give strength to other women who also learn to transform silence into resistance. And then, as if destiny were on my side, the perfect opportunity to act arose. It was destiny, or perhaps a breath of justice, that placed in my hands the opportunity one had been waiting for. My son's birthday was approaching, and the daughter-in-law, as always, wanted to turn the occasion into a spectacle. "We need a big party, Mom, to show that the family is united," she said, with that smile that hid poison behind her teeth. I just agreed, with the calm of someone who already knew that night, the curtain would fall on everyone. I spent days helping with the preparations. She chose expensive flowers, linen tablecloths, glasses I had never seen. She sent frantic messages to distant relatives, influential neighbors, and even my son's work colleagues. She wanted an audience. Little did she know that was exactly what I needed. With every detail she organized, I saw the stage being set. The colorful balloons that would decorate the yard, the abundant tables that would attract looks, the loud music that would serve as a backdrop. I, in silence, kept in my heart the papers, the recordings, and the sharp words that would become my weapon. The day arrived. The house, which so many times seemed small to harbor so much pain, now seemed to expand to receive each witness. The smell of food mixed with my daughter-in-law's exaggerated perfume, who circulated in a new dress, as if she were the star of the night. The shine of the necklace on her neck reflected the ambition that dripped from her eyes. The guests kept arriving, neighbors who barely greeted me at the gate, relatives who only appeared on important dates, my son's friends who laughed loudly and toasted without noticing the tension in the air. Everyone smiling, everyone celebrating, without imagining they were about to witness a spectacle they wouldn't forget. I stayed in the kitchen for a while, feigning humility. Anyone looking from outside saw just an aged woman in a simple dress, taking care of the food. But behind the apron, my heart beat like a war drum. With each passing minute, the certainty grew. It was that night that I would transform my pain into justice. My daughter-in-law, vain, raised glasses and made exaggerated speeches about united family and new times. My son, shy, smiled awkwardly, oblivious to the abyss he was about to fall into. I watched them like someone watching actors repeating rehearsed lines, not knowing the play would have a different ending. Their laughter echoed loudly, but inside me the sound was different. That of pages kept in my notebook, of recordings hidden in my cell phone, of memories of each humiliation that brought me there. I knew that when the music dimmed and silence fell over that improvised hall, I would have in my hands the chance to turn the entire story against them. And while the cake was placed on the table, decorated with glowing candles, I smiled for the first time in a long time, not with bitterness, but with the certainty that the real gift would be mine. Little did they know that each toast that night was actually a step toward the abyss I had prepared for them. The music still echoed in the yard. Glasses clinked and laughter spread through the air when I decided the moment had come. The cake had been cut, the toasts repeated, and my daughter-in-law, radiant, circulated among the guests as if she were the true hostess of that house. Tight dress, high heels, frozen smile. It was the image of victory she believed she had already conquered. I walked to the living room, my steps slow but firm. In my hands, a discreet folder that no one had noticed until then. I invited those present to gather, my voice calm, but loaded with something that made the chatter gradually diminish. One by one, eyes turned to me. Even my daughter-in-law, accustomed to ignoring me, stopped to listen. I placed the folder on the table, between champagne glasses and plates still dirty with cake. I opened it slowly, letting the sound of paper echo in the sudden silence. I removed the house sale contract, the one I had found hidden, and held it in the air. I imagine many here think this party is just to celebrate my son's birthday, I began, looking at each face around me. But actually, there's something else happening. Something that concerns not just me, but the history of this family. My son paled. The daughter-in-law kept her chin raised, but her eyes, for an instant, were lost. I unfolded the contract on the table, revealing the electronic signature, the real estate stamp, the terms that practically expelled me from my own house. The silence was brutal. I could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator, the scraping of a chair. One of the guests murmured quietly, "My God." I read excerpts aloud, each word cutting through the air like a blade. Property available for immediate transaction. My voice didn't tremble. Owner will be removed after final signature. My son tried to intervene, stuttering, "Mom, it's not exactly like that." But the daughter-in-law squeezed his arm, like someone ordering silence. The guests looked at me, some with amazement, others with discomfort. Neighbors whispered among themselves. Relatives widened their eyes. The room, lit by festive lights, now seemed like an improvised tribunal. My daughter-in-law, trying to regain control, laughed nervously. "This is nothing but a misunderstanding. You're confused." But my calm dismantled her more than any scream. I just stared at her, letting her mask begin to crack before everyone. The folder wasn't empty yet. And inside it was something much stronger than printed papers. Something that, when revealed, would make each person in that room see the truth without return. And then, before everyone, I pressed the button that would seal their fate. My fingers touched the cell phone that was kept in the pocket of my simple dress. The weight of that device seemed greater than ever. It wasn't just an object. It was the black box where I had stored every poisonous word, every phrase spat with contempt. I took a deep breath, pressed the button, and let the room be taken by a voice that wasn't mine. The first phrase echoed loud and clear, breaking the silence like thunder. "I want to get rid of this old woman quickly, keep the house and end this soap opera." My daughter-in-law's voice, unmistakable. The effect was immediate. Guests holding glasses let the glass clink against plates. An aunt brought her hand to her mouth, horrified. Neighbors looked at each other, murmuring with amazement. My son, pale, seemed to want to hide inside his own skin. And the audio continued, each word crueler than the last. "She won't live much longer, just push until she gives in." Her son is weak, does everything I tell him. Soon the house will be ours. Shame exploded in the air like gunpowder. I didn't need to say anything. Her own voice condemned her. My daughter-in-law tried to rise, trying to overcome the scandal. "This is fake," she screamed, but the insecurity in her voice betrayed her. Her eyes spun nervously, looking for allies who were no longer there. Every look of disapproval was a sentence against her. My son babbled, almost crying. I didn't know it would go this far. But it no longer mattered what he said. The audience had heard. The entire hall had transformed into a stage, and the mask my daughter-in-law had worn for years was in pieces. I, standing, didn't raise my voice, didn't need an inflammatory speech. I just let silence speak. Because sometimes the greatest force isn't in the scream, but in the unshakable calm of someone who finally stands up. The whispers increased. Cell phones began to be discreetly raised to record the scene. The story no longer belonged just to that moment. It was spreading through looks, through screens, through the memories of each witness. And in that instant I understood. I no longer needed to hide. How many people do you know have already been diminished, silenced, or betrayed like this? Share this story. Let it echo beyond these walls and give courage to those who still suffer in silence. But there was still something kept, one last revelation capable of destroying any hope they had of rising again. The room still boiled with the weight of the recorded words. My daughter-in-law's face was livid. Sweat dripped under the expensive makeup that no longer sustained the mask. My son trembled, trying to articulate disconnected phrases, but the audience, neighbors, relatives, friends, had already given their silent sentence. Their shame was irreversible. It was then that I decided to show my last card. That piece of paper that wasn't just a document, but the key that sealed my destiny and theirs. Calmly, I opened the folder that rested on the table again. The sound of the metallic clasp sounded like thunder in the heavy silence. I removed a sealed envelope, marked by the notary's office. The crowd leaned curiously, the air charged with expectation. "Many here think this house will be natural inheritance for my son," I began with a firm and measured voice. "But the truth is I made my decision a long time ago." I opened the envelope and revealed the document before everyone. The updated will. The notary's clear handwriting confirmed each line. I took a deep breath and continued. "This house, built with my years of work and sacrifice, will not be handed over to those who dishonored me, who tried to expel me. It's already registered to an institution that shelters elderly black women, who fight for housing and dignity." A murmur ran through the hall. People looked at each other, some surprised, others moved. A neighbor, who had so often seen me arriving from work tired, let slip a brava. My son brought his hands to his face in shock. The daughter-in-law, on the other hand, completely lost her footing. Her wide eyes betrayed rage and despair. She babbled, "This can't be. This house was supposed to be for us." But her voice was lost amid the chorus of murmurs and looks of disapproval. There was no possible defense. I, however, wasn't there to savor cheap revenge. My gesture was bigger. It was an act of justice, of returning to the world what the world had so often tried to steal from me. Dignity, respect, voice. My house wouldn't be a memory of betrayal, but shelter for those who, like me, had been made invisible. I raised the document in the air, and the light's shine reflected on the paper as if it were a banner. For the first time in a long time I felt completely free. And it was in this instant, before everyone, that the final mask fell, revealing not just their ambition, but their true defeat. The silence after the will's revelation seemed like a heavy blanket covering the room. Only the noise of cutlery being dropped on plates and the shocked whispers of guests could be heard. My daughter-in-law, who before reigned like queen of that party, now seemed like a cornered animal, pacing back and forth, eyes red, breathing uneven. Suddenly she exploded. "This is a farce," she screamed, her voice choked. "This woman is making everything up to humiliate us." Screaming, she pointed at me, trying to regain some control. But the audience was no longer on her side. People looked at her with a mixture of disapproval and disgust. Cell phones still recorded, registering every gesture, every word. What was supposed to be my son's birthday party had become the stage for her judgment. My son, on the other hand, remained seated, with his head down and hands covering part of his face. His omission was now visible to everyone. The son who didn't defend his mother, the man who let himself be manipulated by greed. His silence was as condemning as his wife's screams. She tried to approach me, firm steps, fingers trembling like claws. But two guests placed themselves between us, preventing her from passing. The gesture was automatic, almost instinctive. No one accepted seeing the violence I had endured alone for so long. "You can't do this. This house was our chance," she screamed, but the voice no longer had authority. It was just despair. I looked at her in silence. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just stared at her, letting the weight of my serenity be greater than any attack. Because the strength of my victory was precisely in the calm that disarmed her. My son finally raised his face. Teary eyes met mine. There was no request for forgiveness, no justification. A shame. He knew he had chosen the wrong side, and that the story of that day would be marked forever. The guests, one by one, began to move away from her. Some shook their heads, others murmured criticisms, and some recorded every detail to spread in the neighborhood, on networks everywhere. Her humiliation was no longer just private. It was public, irreversible. And I, standing in the center of the room, felt that the invisible woman, silenced for years, had finally become impossible to ignore. But what really surprised me wasn't their fall, but the change in looks that began to emerge around me. When the screams ceased and my daughter-in-law retreated to a corner, with her dress wrinkled and face stained with tears and smeared makeup, something unexpected happened. The entire hall plunged into a different silence. Not the heavy silence of humiliation, but a silence full of reverence. I noticed in the eyes of people around me that something had changed. Those same mouths that so often ignored me at the gate now whispered words of admiration. A neighbor, who before passed without even responding to my "good morning," approached slowly and said, "Mrs. Alzira, you are stronger than many people here ever imagined." Others agreed. Some even clapped discreetly, as if they were at a ceremony. My heart tightened. Not because I needed their approval, but because, for the first time, they weren't looking at me as the old woman left over, but as the woman who resisted and won. My eyes turned to my son. He remained seated, but now there was no way to escape the look that united us. There was shame, yes, but also a glimmer of something that seemed like regret. He said nothing. He just let the tears flow. And, in that instant, I realized my victory wasn't just over the daughter-in-law, but also over his omission. He would have to carry that weight for the rest of his life. I, on the other hand, felt a new lightness. It wasn't empty revenge. It was justice. It was returning to the world a part of me they tried to steal so many times. Dignity. The black woman they created to be silence was now voice. The party no longer had a party atmosphere. But it was no longer awake either. It was something in between, a rite of passage. A closed chapter before witnesses. And every look of respect I received was like one more brick raised over the ruins they tried to impose on me. I felt my legs firm, posture erect, breathing calm. The same calm they confused with weakness was now understood as strength. And the silence that made me invisible had transformed into public respect. But there was still the last word, the reflection I needed to leave engraved in everyone's memory, so they would never confuse kindness with submission. I looked around and saw each face fixed on me. It was as if everyone was waiting for a last word, a closure that would give meaning to that unexpected spectacle. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh night air enter through the open windows. And then I spoke, not just to them, but to all the voices that had tried to silence me throughout life. For years, you confused my silence with weakness. You thought my patience was submission, that my kindness was naivety. But today you saw with your own eyes. Kindness is not synonymous with weakness. Some nodded in silence. Others murmured in agreement. I continued firmly. I built this house with tired hands, but also with dignity. And no one, not even my own blood, will erase my history. Today I didn't just show who they are. I also showed who I always was. Those words came from inside me as if they had been kept for decades. I didn't speak with anger, but with a serenity that only truth can give. My daughter-in-law, huddled in a corner, could no longer sustain the gaze. My son remained with his head down, digesting the shame that had finally reached him. And, for an instant, I felt sorry for him. But not to the point of forgiving what he did to me. Some marks don't erase. To the guests, I left one last message. Never underestimate the power of a woman who learned to endure in silence. Because one day, that silence transforms into voice. And when that happens, no mask survives. The applause came timid, then strong, and finally echoed through the entire room. They weren't just applause for me, but for all the invisibilized women who, at some point, stood up. While closing the folder with the documents and collecting my cell phone, I felt an immense weight leave my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just the owner of the house. I was the owner of my own story. If this story touched you, subscribe. Not just for me, but for all the voices that are still silenced and need to find strength. Join this community so more people know. Kindness never was and never will be weakness. And so, I left the room with my head held high, leaving behind not just a ruined party, but the certainty that justice, when it arrives, shines brighter than any humiliation.